I'm Dylan.
And I'm Keon.
And this is Torchwood The BBC, that podcast where we vomit rose petals. Because this week we watched Small Worlds.
Written by PJ Hammond.
Directed by Alice Troughton.
And aired on November 12th, 2006. So this is what Sapphire and Steel would be if they had money.
Yeah, I mean, this story's got all the PJ Hammond trademarks, including, like, not really explaining, like, what the hell anything was, and then ending on a suitably downer note where the hero just has to make a really bad choice to save the day, and then they just do it, and everyone's like, wow, how can you do that?
You know I said this basically every week when we were watching Sapphire and Steel for Inevitable, a classic sci-fi podcast. Check that out. But I feel this was a little bit more concrete than most Sapphire and Steel stories were.
Yeah, you really did say that every week on Sapphire and Steel, and then every week by the end of the podcast episode, it was, well, maybe this wasn't as obvious as I thought it was at first.
Yeah, every week on Sapphire and Steel, I'd be like, yeah, I don't really think this is, all that out there or confusing. Like, it all seemed to make a lot of sense. And then we'd actually discuss the episode, and I'd just be like, well, guess I was wrong.
At least you can admit when you're wrong, Keon. At least you can admit.
Well, I take it all back now.
You're like, never mind. I actually didn't know this was written by PJ Hammond until halfway through the episode, and I made a joke about this being assignment 2 because there's like flashbacks to a train, and it's like all sepia tone, and I was like, is this assignment 2? And then later on I was like, hey, this is written by PJ Hammond. Wow, this really is assignment 2.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities between this and assignment 2. The worst Sapphire and Steel assignment.
Usually when you like cough like that, it's to hide a controversial opinion.
I think that's a lot of people think 2 or 4 is the best Sapphire and Steel assignment.
That's
Whereas
true.
I say it's 4 or 5.
Or 6?
6 is really good too.
Well, okay, that's fair. I guess my point was that's not really a controversial opinion on this podcast.
Yeah,
Since
plus,
I think we both agreed that number 2 was the least strong, the least good of all the stories.
Yeah, plus, who really even cares about Sapphire and Steel anymore? I mean, yeah, it has its stragglers. It has the people holding on to former glory, to a lost past.
And if our podcast is anything to go by, that's a substantial amount of people. That's a substantial amount of people.
Even Big Finish doesn't have their audios available anymore. Even they knew that it wasn't worth keeping Sapphire and Steel around.
I think they just lost the rights.
Exactly, and they didn't fight for them.
Probably because it wasn't making them as much bank as the Doctor Who ones were.
Exactly.
Okay, you can't... Okay, nothing's gonna make them as much money as the media juggernaut that is Doctor Who. Definitely not Sapphire and Steel.
You never know. Big Finish has made their name on reviving and desperately holding on to shows that should have died out ages ago. So, you never know.
Wow, that's a pretty big knock against Big Finish. I hope that Big Finish, the nameless entity, isn't listening to this podcast and hearing you just rag all over their business model.
Yeah, watch halfway through this episode, Big Finish, open up!
I guess Big Finish is a paramilitary organization now.
Get swatted by Big Finish.
Well, there have actually been attempted burglaries near where I live for the past week, so maybe Big Finish, the paramilitary organization in this episode of Trust Your Doctor, could come and save me, us, me from the burglar. I don't know why it was so hard to say the word burglar right there. Anyway, let's just get back to the episode of Torchwood. So, I couldn't really find any, like, production stuff on this. Except Wikipedia asserting that the closing credits contain quiet fairy laughter in the background. But I don't remember hearing them, so maybe I just wasn't paying attention, or Wikipedia is just blistering, like letting a blistering lie out into the world.
Wouldn't be the first time, it won't be the last. I didn't hear that either, but maybe, I don't know.
I like the ominous implication behind "won't be the last" there. Like you're gonna slip some lies into Wikipedia in the next week.
Well, it won't be me. Yeah, it won't be me, but like it'll happen at some point.
At some point. But that some point doesn't have to be soon or now or even ever in our lifetimes.
I guess. Yeah, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's like literally all I found production-wise.
Yeah, PJ Hammond is not like as interesting a character as Sapphire and Steel would make you think he is.
I thought he was an incredibly interesting character for that fact. For the fact that he's just like, I wrote it down because it was weird. He's like the anti-Patrick McGoohan. He's like the anti-Patrick McGoohan. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, Patrick McGoohan sounds pretty... He doesn't sound down to earth whatsoever, but he sounds like... He when he talks about the prisoner, it's like... I don't know. It's very not, like, complex.
I found a quote this week for the episode of The Prisoner that I think that Patrick McGoohan said, allegedly, that rails pretty hardly against that point of view, actually. I think the quote I have found for Patrick this week, that I'm not saying only because I want to save it, your reaction to it for that episode, but the gist of the quote is, like, we were definitely trying to push a message in every episode of The Prisoner, which is why I say he's the anti-PJ, because PJ was just like, I wrote it because it was cool, and if you want to get something out of it, that's cool, but I don't know what was going on.
Well, just like, but that's just saying, like, yeah, I have a mess, or I have an agenda, or I have a message push, or whatever, like, that doesn't make things, like, overly complex or complicated. That actually simplifies.
Yeah, but that's not what I'm not
lot.
saying that it's complex. I'm just saying that, like, the motivation behind it was different. That PJ was just writing it to write it, and Patrick McGoohan was writing it because he had a message that he was pushing. That I'm not making any comment on whether it's complex or simple at all.
Yeah, well, we probably shouldn't get too heavy into this, but like, yeah, I mean, The Prisoner was definitely a response against like the type of TV that was made for like, yeah, just get it out there and so we can get paid.
Hell yeah, paycheck.
Which like Danger Man and like other shows like The Saint and whatever pretty much definitely were.
Yeah. Well, we'll save that for Inevitable, a classic sci-fi podcast. Check that out. Meanwhile, over in Torchwood Land, open on a forest.
Yeah. An old woman walking through a forest. She sees some fairies.
And she takes a picture with them on a film camera, which pretty sure digital cameras existed in 2006. Pretty sure digital cameras had existed for over a decade by 2006. But there's actually no point to the statement except that I think digital cameras existed in 2006.
Yeah, they did.
I realized halfway through saying that it probably makes more sense for her to shoot on film because that's probably the camera that she already owns. She probably didn't want to buy a new camera. I don't know why this was such a problem for me. It's not a problem. It's actually not a problem anymore.
Maybe it's like, maybe the fairies like don't show up on like digital images. Maybe they only show up on like film, I don't know.
Or it's just PJ Hammond holding on to the glory days of assignment 3. Was that 3 or 4?
Four.
Was
It
it
was
4?
4. Yeah, the one where they get trapped in every photograph. Yeah, I highly doubt that what type of camera it was written into the script, but maybe.
The BBC props department was so broke that they were just like, this is the only camera we can find. Who plays Estelle? Eve Pierce. So you're just gonna have to go with it.
And she did brilliantly.
Anyway, we see Jack sleeping, and he's sleeping shirtless. And again, my note is, damn, Jack is still ripped as heck. So,
yeah.
do you think like his immortality, like, do you think he's preserved in the really buff form that he died in, and he can like never change his body shape, or do you think the immortality only extends so far as like not dying?
I have no. I've never. That idea has never crossed my mind
because
before.
he as a person is a fixed point in time. So now I'm wondering, like, does that extend beyond just his life being a fixed point? Like, is his bodily form a fixed point as well? And that's why he could die as the face of Bo, because like he didn't look like Jack. Whoa.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory there.
Well, that's neither here nor there, I guess. Since I don't think we get any evidence either way, like at all.
Watch this just be like an explicit major plot element in season 2 or something. Anyway, Jack and Gwen go to sort of a conspiracy like demonstration by this old woman.
Well, Jack also has like a nightmare or like a flashback.
Right, yeah.
And it's unclear to like what war this is a flashback to at first. But we see Jack looking at his friends, and they're just like vomiting up rose petals, which are the only thing that aren't sepia toned in this flashback.
I didn't even notice that in this part of the episode. I guess because I wasn't like really paying attention to it.
Well, you weren't really like clued into like the symbolism of what the rose petals represented in this story, I guess. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And he also sees Ianto before he goes with Gwen.
Oh, yeah. He goes, "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here."
And Ianto's like,
"We fired you." No.
Yeah, that's kind of the thought that was in the back of my mind, but clearly not. And then Ianto's like, "Neither should you." But then I was like, but doesn't Jack like live here? So.
Yeah. What if they did fire Ianto and he's just like, "Well, I'm not leaving."
He's like, if I leave, I'm going to tell everyone about everything. And then Jack's just like, we've got a drug that can erase your mind, right? Yeah. Remember that plot thread and everything changes? Remember that? Remember that Jack roofied Gwen? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Actually, before we get the little demonstration, we cut to a girl whose parents have forgotten to pick her up from school. Right, and the stepdad is named Roy. And my notes here is like, it's always someone named Roy. Roy just gives me like a-hole vibes as a name. I don't know why. No, why? Because it means king. Yeah, maybe because like most of the kings of England were dicks. If you have the audacity to be named Roy, then how dare you be named Roy? But he sort of begrudgingly goes to pick the girl up. But she's already started walking home from school and runs into a pedophile. Who, like, I was like, when this scene happened, I was like, there's no way they're actually going for the, like, "Hey, little girl, your mom told me to pick you up," and, like, tries to grab her thing. I was like, there's no way that this is, like, where this is going to go in the next 10 seconds. And that's exactly where it went in the next 10 seconds. Yeah, yep, surprise. It's literally exactly where it goes. And she like walks under a bridge and he pulls up and he's like, "Hey, your mom told me to get you." And she's like, "No, bugger off." And he's like, "Hey, get in the car." And she's like, "No." And then the dude just gets attacked by invisible fairies. which
Yeah.
we know they're fairies because cut to conspiracy demonstration by Estelle.
Right, Estelle was the woman who was walking in the forest at the beginning. Jack and Gwen kind of walk in right at the end and only catch this sort of like, and that's why fairies are real. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk, like type thing at the end.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. And then Jack meets with Estelle after the kind of talk. Although before he does that, he has kind of this comment under his breath to Gwen, where he's like, she always gets it wrong. And Gwen's like, what?
Right, because her entire demonstration is about how the fairies are like good, benevolent beings. And Jack is just like, haha, nope.
She uses this photograph, or one of these photographs, to start her presentation before using her own photographs. And this photograph is actually a really famous photograph, well, relatively famous. And they actually talk about this later in the episode and explain it, but it's one of what's called the Cottingley Fairies photographs, which are these two cousins who took 5. I think the general number is taken to be 5 photographs of them with, quote, fairies, unquote. And Conan Doyle believed that they were real and published an article on them. And apparently the reception was a mix of confusion and apprehension, because Conan Doyle was obviously a respected author at the time. This was 1920s, I want to say, or it was 1919 through 1921. That's what it was. So right at the turn of the decade. Anyway, in like 1986, the cousins were like, yeah, we faked all those photographs. except, okay, the 5th photograph is like, they both disagree because the one is like, no, that one's definitely real. The other 4 are fake. And the other cousin's like, no, that one's definitely fake too.
The other 4 are real. No. Yeah, that's an interesting story. I'm surprised you knew all of that. Although I think they do mention it later in the episode, but not in that much detail.
Yeah, they talk about it later, but not in that much detail. I don't remember when I first encountered the Cottingley fairies. Probably when I was reading about Conan Doyle when I was like into Sherlock Holmes a couple of years ago, and I was like, man, want to know like what's up with this author guy. And yeah, he was apparently a big believer. I didn't know this for a long time, that he was a big believer in like psychic phenomena, and part of the reason why he wanted the fairy photographs to be real was because he believed that if people believed the photographs, they would be more amenable to believe in other psychic phenomena.
Weird that like he didn't put any supernatural stuff into like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. How do the Baskervilles, I feel like, flirts with the idea? I mean, didn't he write like a book called The Lost World that was kind of heavily supernatural?
Oh, I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know.
I seem to remember that he wrote a book called The Lost World, and like part of the reason why he killed off Sherlock Holmes was because he wanted his other writing to be more appreciated, but then like nobody read any of his other writing because I guess it like either wasn't that good or like wasn't that interesting. And then he was like, damn, gotta bring Sherlock Holmes back, which is also why the stories post Sherlock's death are generally noticeably worse than the pre-death ones.
Damn, I need money.
Yeah, Hound of the Baskervilles is one of the exceptions, because I believe that was written after Sherlock was killed off. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, beats the heck out of me.
Yeah, that one was, because now I'm remembering that like that one was originally not conceived as a Sherlock Holmes story, but no one would buy it unless it had Sherlock Holmes in. I think that's the story. You know what? I'll double check and I'll put it in the show notes. But I do know he wrote a story called The Lost World and had supernatural elements, and it didn't sell very well. Anyway, back to the story.
They go and talk with Estelle, and Estelle's like, "Hey, got some pictures of these fairies." And she hints at a prior relationship between her and Jack, or that she knew Jack's father, quote unquote.
And she's like, kind of weird how Jack looks exactly like his dad, walks exactly like his dad, talks exactly like his dad. Pretty weird. But, I never questioned it. And Gwen's like, wow.
Well, she mentions that, like, every time she tried to bring it up, Jack didn't. Jack just, like, shut the entire conversation down or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of those things that, like, people will believe the easiest version of events to believe, right? Like, she could believe or surmise that Jack is the same person, but what's easier to believe? That Jack's dad just died and his son, like, happens to be really similar because maybe her memory's fading and maybe she doesn't remember exactly what he's like, or that Jack is, like, 300 years old and immortal. Like, what's easier to believe, right?
Yeah, right. But somehow Gwen is basically already clued into it. But we'll see that more in like another scene.
Well, because she knows that Jack is immortal, so she has information that Estelle doesn't, really.
I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Jack mentions that what Estelle always gets wrong is that Estelle says there are only good fairies, and Jack says there are definitely bad ones as well. And then this is where I have a note that said, I suppose this is the Jack episode, which pretty much this is the Jack episode.
Yeah.
Because Toshi and Wildcard Owen don't really have anything to do this week, and Gwen's just kind of there to be Jack's, like, left-hand girl.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, in the previous couple of episodes, Owen has, like, had a lot of lines, and in this one he doesn't. So, like, it really stood out to me that he didn't have, like, every time he had, like, I don't know, maybe 5 lines in this episode, and, like, every time he said something, I'd be like, whoa, like, Owen's not saying anything.
Yeah, but I kind of like the change of pace, we need a little respite from Owen before he comes back crazier than ever next week, I guess. I don't know. Next week seems like it's going to be pretty wild because Ianto's going out into the field, so that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, while we're talking about the preview, just like last week's preview for this episode, I have no idea what next week's episode is going to be about from the preview.
No, but I do think next week has a really clever episode title, and for that alone, I really give it points. The episode title is Countryside, but spelt country and then CIDE, like,
Oh, yeah.
I think that's really clever. Wow. Watch it just once you watch the episode not be as clever because there's, like, no murder or anything. It's just they just wanted a clever title.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like Small Worlds. I didn't even remember the title of this episode until a few minutes ago when I looked it up.
I don't really know the title of any of these episodes till I finish the episode. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, at some point, these are all going to start blending into one another, or, like, not blending into one another, but not be rememberable, like how we can't remember Doctor Who episode.
Yeah.
Or I can't, at least. I have a really hard time remembering Doctor Who episode names.
Unless it's something I either really liked or really hated. Jack has a suitably PJ Hammond line where he describes the fairies as memories that are trapped in time and twisted by dark forces, which just, like, what?
Yeah, there's an entire sequence. Like, Jack has a very long speech where he's ostensibly explaining what the fairies are to Gwen, but, like, you come out the other side of it more confused than when you went in. Which, like, PJ Hammond has that ability, to, like, explain things for 5 minutes, and then you, at the end of the explanation, you go like, wait, what? Like, this is less clear now.
Yeah, and then immediately Gwen goes, so what are they? And Jack goes, I don't know. We don't know. We literally, whatever. We don't know.
Well, he goes, they're like, he does explain that they're, like, ancient. They've been around since, like, the beginning of the world or whatever. And that they're, like, unfathomable by everyone and everything.
And that they exist outside of time. So time doesn't affect them in, like, a linear manner.
Yeah.
So we cut back to the pedophile, who I'm sure had a name, but
it was I think it was Goodson.
Oh yeah,
I'm
Goodson.
just looking on Wikipedia.
Yeah, Goodson.
I think he had a first name too, but Wikipedia just has him as Goodson.
Goodson is fine. I think he was just credited as Goodson in the
Really,
episode. So
really ironic name there.
yeah,
It's good and his
Good and Son.
Anyway, yeah. Anyway, he's stumbling through the streets of Cardiff, vomiting petals.
Yeah, but he survives this escapade, and then he runs up to a cop, and he's like, help me, help me. And then he proceeds to, like, try and steal her cop car.
Oh, really? I didn't catch that.
He opens the door and tries to get in, and she, like, grabs him and is like, hey, what are you doing? Which, in hindsight, is, like, maybe his way of getting her to lock him up, because as soon as they get to the prison, he's like, lock me up, keep me somewhere safe, lock me up. And then he has this like really creepy line where he's like, I've been in trouble before, you know, it's little girls, they're just innocent smiles, they're like sunshine. I'm like, oh boy, whoa.
Yeah. Torchwood. This ain't the Doctor Who that you knew and loved.
We forgot to mention that Ianto drops an F-bomb in Cyberwoman, which is the second F-bomb in the show.
Yeah. Imagine if when they brought back Doctor Who, it was like this.
I'd be like, bravo, Russell T, bringing Doctor Who into the new era. Honestly, that's like, if you think about it, if you rebooted Doctor Who in 2020, it'd be like hard to avoid that kind of dark, cynical attitude, given just like the nonsense we've been through as a society this year. And we still have like 5 months to go.
I also think that like if the Doctor Who new series came out in like 2020 instead of 2005, like it would be more akin to this for sure. Just because like there aren't like kids don't really watch like TV shows like this, I feel. Like, I mean, yeah, like probably our generation, or people who are in their like early to mid 20s right now, is probably like the last generation who kind of like this is sort of like bread and butter for them. But like obviously there are people younger who watch this show, who watch Doctor Who specifically, and who watch like traditional like TV shows. But I don't know, I feel like kids who are, I don't know, what, 10 to 15 right now are more into like online stuff or like TikTok and stuff like that.
And also like streaming, you know,
yeah,
where you can watch the entire season in one weekend or 1 week.
Exactly. Or watching a streamer who like just sits down and plays video games, or, you know, sits down and, I don't know, plays whatever, Mahjong.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of society...
I went to Mahjong, but like, hey, you never know.
I mean, it's interesting how society is now like built on those parasocial relationships, right? Like part of the reason why I think our generation may not have necessarily fallen into that is because it
didn't exist.
It didn't exist, but also it wasn't so easy like with your cell phone to just like shoot a text off and be like, hey, what up? What you doing? You know, to talk with anyone, literally anywhere in the world. We were like right on the cusp of when that was becoming big. Right.
Yeah, and I think like a show like Doctor Who would have to skew older if it were to be if again like it were to come out in 2020 instead of 2005, because I just think it would be so much more difficult to like have kids. I mean, because I see like online stuff like, yeah, I've been watching Doctor Who since 2005 when I was like 8. And like, yeah, I was around 8 in 2005 as well, but I didn't watch it. But it's like it's something that our, you know, people our age started watching and enjoying the show at that time. You know,
it is. I mean, it is kind of telling. Like, if you look at Doctor Who's streaming numbers, how they're so much higher than the people who watch the episodes live now. Like, we kind of already seen that shift to Doctor Who, that a lot of people are moving to watching it on streaming platforms, either on like BBC iPlayer the night after it comes out, or people who just wait for the whole season to be out on like Netflix or Prime or BritBox or whatever the heck it's streaming on now to watch the whole season once it airs.
Yeah, it is on BritBox, actually. When I accidentally forgot to cancel my BritBox subscription and paid for BritBox for a month, I had access to like all of Doctor Who.
I did that with CBS All Access. It was great. I had access to the entire NCIS back catalog. Great.
Yeah, that's how they get you. Like, it's so easy to forget to not cancel your free trial.
Well, the thing was, I had even put like a reminder into my nice Google Home government surveillance device.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just like, I have this problem where sometimes it'll disconnect from my phone, or when it's not connected to my phone, I'll just be like, okay, I'm not going to give you your reminders now. And I'll be like, wow, thanks, Google. Thanks. So now I've returned to putting the reminders into my phone. My other government mandated surveillance device.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, back on topic. They lock up the guy, and then we have the I guess standard Torchwood briefing scene where they're in the conference room getting some information about fairies, and this is when we get our Amazon X-ray fact of the week. I need to like edit in some sort of jingle for these segments, like some sort of fun background jingle.
Does Amazon have a jingle?
No, I don't think it does.
Huh.
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, I can't think of one either.
I mean, Netflix has that really obvious, like, it's not like a jingle per se, but that sound effect that plays when you start like a Netflix original movie with the Netflix logo that zooms in.
Yeah, it's like a weak version of like the THX intro.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But I don't think Amazon necessarily has one, actually.
No, yeah. I mean, why go through the trouble of paying for and producing something like that when you can just not?
They do have the Amazon Studios logo, which maybe that has a little jingle for like the movies they fund / produce / release or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, Amazon X-ray fact of the week. Jack compares the fairies to Mara, a spectre or wraith-like creature in Germanic and particularly Scandinavian folklore thought to cause nightmares, also called, quote, spirit of confusion, unquote, which I think is what Jack specifically refers to as the spirit of confusion aspect of them. Anyway, the fact goes on to say that Snake Dance and, what was the other one? Kinda feature a being named the Mara that's based on the Buddhist demon, or Buddhist, depending on your pronunciation, of the same name, but is an unrelated demon, the same name. The X-ray fact also has this rather lengthy attempt or explanation on how Torchwood and Doctor Who, Kinda and Snake Dance are connected to this by saying Doctor Who 1963, which shares continuity with Torchwood 2006 via Doctor Who 2006. So there you go. Anyway, this fun fact is actually quoted on the Wikipedia page in the outside references section, and it's got a big fat citation needed slapped on it.
Nice.
Which I think is hilarious. Maybe because the fact on Wikipedia indicates that Christopher Bailey, who wrote Snake Dance and Kinda, was a practicing Buddhist. Maybe that's what needs a citation. It's also interesting that they refer to him as the author of Snake Dance and Kinda and not the writer. That's kind of weird, actually.
Yeah, that is.
Anyway, there's your Amazon X-ray fact of the week.
Another interesting element of this, another curveball you might say, is someone, I forget who, but it's probably Jack, was like, that's where the word nightmare comes from. It's from Mara. I'm pretty sure that's completely fake. I made up for this episode.
Yeah, I'm not convinced.
There's like this painting that was made in like the 1700s, or maybe it was like the early 1800s or something, called The Nightmare. And it's like, it shows this like sleeping woman, I think. And there's just like this creepy, disturbing looking horse like standing next to her as she sleeps. And that painting is called The Nightmare. And I'm pretty sure that's actually where the word nightmare comes from. As in like, mare is in like a horse.
Yeah. Huh. That's really interesting.
I think actually. That's where, like, I'll look it up and put it in the show notes, but I'm pretty sure that's where that entire word comes from.
Getting into the real etymology
Yeah.
on Trust Your Doctor. That's what people come to this show for.
Exactly. We disguised an etymology podcast as a Doctor Who podcast.
That was our biggest coup.
Wait, what other coups have we like committed? Oh, I forgot. Watching 7 weeks of bad Doctor Who when like a few people wanted us to
everyone wanted us to just get to Torchwood, damn it.
Anyway,
so they can't track the fairies, but whenever the fairies act, they cause strange weather disturbances. So Toshi has set up a system to detect strange weather events in this.
Well, we're on fire this morning.
Yeah, we're on fire this morning. Let's just say that I didn't sleep really well last night, and it's not for lack of trying. Let's just put it that way. Not for lack of trying.
Yeah, and we were going also through some technical difficulties before we started recording. Don't need to get too deep into that, but it happened.
Let's just say quarantine has finally caught up to the recording of Trust Your Doctor.
Yeah.
So, Jack explains... Well, actually, no. Jack doesn't explain this yet, because they go to the town because they get an alert on Toshi's weather monitoring system that there's a weird rainstorm happening right above Estelle's house. And she's called Jack because Jack was like, look, if you ever need me, doesn't matter what time of day, you just call me. So she's calling Jack because she's like, oh shoot, there are bad fairies. Help.
I think, doesn't Goodson die first? Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. Goodson does die first.
They get like an alert that someone has died in the county jail or whatever. So they go and they see Goodson, he's dead, and his mouth is stuffed with petals.
And Jack's like, I've seen this before. And then we get to see the scene that I guess I jumped the gun a little bit, but the debriefing scene in the conference room. Then we get Estelle calling.
And the weird thing about both Goodson's and Estelle's deaths is that like Goodson was suffocated even though there was no sign of him being like strangled or anything, and Estelle was drowned in her backyard with no water in sight.
Right. Although it was raining.
Yeah.
She only goes outside to look for Moses. Moses! What happens to Moses? Moses is a cat. I guess I should explain.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever get a resolution for Moses.
Damn. These are the kind of things I want Torchwood to answer. What happens to the cat when the fairies attack its owner?
Probably just went stray.
Come on, Torchwood. Probably. So, Jack explains now to Gwen only, because Gwen's like, when you said you had seen this before, when we saw Goodson's body, what did you mean? Because I actually noted this. He never actually explained what he meant when he said that. And I guess Owen and Toshi is just like, that's just Jack.
Right.
But he explains that in World War II, his platoon and him were traveling via train. Actually, no, this is World War One. Sorry, this was 1909.
It was.
The World War II stuff was his dad and Estelle.
It wasn't World War One. It was like it's some earlier conflict or whatever on the Indian subcontinent, because World War One was like 1917
Yeah.
17 to 21 or 20 or something like that. Mm-hmm. This was, before that.
And he explains that they were being really happy and loud on the train, and they entered a tunnel, and they came out the other side, and everyone was dead except for him, which I guess because he can't die, so he really lucked out that time. Although I have to imagine, like, can you imagine the train pulling up and then, like, the presumably he's going to, like, an army base somewhere, or a military base, I should say, and they, like, open up the door and just, like, everybody's dead except Jack, you know? I feel like there'd be, like, heavy suspicion cast his way after that.
I didn't get the impression, though, that, like, I got the impression that he wasn't even targeted by the face. Like, they didn't even try to kill him. Because he explains right after that, like, the reason the fairies targeted the men is that they were drunk and ran over a child the other day.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I thought they did target Jack was because to me it seemed like, or at least I was unclear on whether or not, like, all of the men in the train were in that truck that ran over the girl except for conveniently Jack, if it was just like a select few and the fairies punished them by killing all of them. Like, I guess I wasn't sure about that.
He kind of implies that it was all of them except him. Although, yeah, you're right. Like, that is a lot for it to be packed into, like, a truck. But it was probably like an army
like a troop transport of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. And that's when he lost all the rose petals and why he's like... He didn't see them get killed, so I kind of have to wonder why he just, like, assumes that they're fairies, but, you know...
Maybe he did a little research into it afterwards. Maybe you read Arthur Conan Doyle's writings on the topic.
I mean, he's had like nearly 100 years to do research on this, because presumably this takes place in 2006, you know, contemporaneous with when it aired.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jasmine, the little girl, is like doing fine.
Well, they just like all of a sudden decide to play into the like stepdad has to be a dick trope now, because he starts being a real dick to Jasmine.
He kind of was in the first scene. So you kind of get that hint, but like, yeah, he dials it up. Also,
in the first scene, though, it was the way they kind of played it off was just like he lost track of time because he was busy on the phone, and that's why he didn't go pick her up. I mean, that's actually literally what he says was he was on the phone because she's like, "Didn't you realize what time it was?" And he's like, "I was on the phone, I wasn't looking."
Yeah. Yeah, but here he really starts. He says like, you know, no wonder your dad left you, like, you little brat.
Yeah, that was oof.
Yeah, because she obviously has sort of a pact with the fairies, and she is talking about them to her mom and stepdad. They don't believe her. And the stepdad is getting real pissed.
Well, because she has a pact with the fairies, but it's because Jack, as Jack explains, that she is what is called a chosen one, and that's why the fairies killed all the soldiers, was because, and this was something Jack realized later, was that the girl that they'd run over was one of the chosen ones, was like a chosen one, and they killed her. So in retribution, the fairies attacked him. So the current chosen one is this girl, Jasmine.
Right. She goes to school, and we kind of had a little foreshadowing for this before, but like she's pretty heavily bullied by at least two girls.
Mm-hmm.
And the fairies, in response to this, cause a wind storm thing.
Yeah. And while this has been going on, the Torchwood team has been looking to see, because Jack theorizes that there's a chosen one now, and that's why these deaths are occurring, because they're attacking whoever the current chosen one is, the people who die. Although Estelle is just like, still a little unclear on why they killed her, but I guess it's just because, like Jasmine says later, they can just kill whoever they want for whatever reason, so cool. But they hear about this incident where this like windstorm was kicked up and like everybody was hurt except for Jasmine, and the teacher explains how Jasmine was there was almost like a spotlight on her, like a light shining just on her, and she was completely unharmed, and that's when Jack goes, she must be the chosen one.
Right. So meanwhile, it's Roy and hold on, she had a name.
It's Lynn.
Roy and Lynn's anniversary, their 5-year anniversary, and Roy has gone through the trouble of putting up a fence in their backyard to keep Jasmine from going out into the woods, because there's an entire thing that we neglected to mention of Jasmine playing a lot out in the woods, and her parents don't like that.
Yeah, can we talk for a moment how impressive it actually is that Roy like built this entire fence in like one afternoon? That's actually very impressive. Like, knowing the work it takes to build a fence, because my dad is a woodworker and like has built just a gate for a fence, and that alone took him like 2 days. Like, it's very impressive that Roy just banged out this fence in like a day. Not even like a couple hours. He just set up this whole fence.
Yeah.
That's the most unbelievable part of the story.
Well, second most unbelievable, because the most unbelievable is the fact that he thought the fence would keep her out.
That's true. You're right. That is pretty unbelievable. How could you, Roy? You absolute buffoon.
Well, it turns out he is a pretty big buffoon, because we get their little anniversary party. Jasmine drops some sweet deets on the fairies to her mom, and how they can like kill and do whatever they want whenever they want, and how she's friends with them. And then she goes out and she tries to go out into the woods, and she sees the fence and starts.
Oh yeah.
Starts throwing a fit. So Roy goes over and teaches her a lesson
by slapping her.
Yeah.
Yeah. The slap sets in motion the rest of the episode. The Torchwood team arrives just as the fairies attack and brutally murder Roy.
Yeah.
In this horrifying scene where they stick their arm down his throat.
As soon as he slapped her, I was like, yeah, well, he's dead. Not making it out of this episode alive.
Yeah, Lynn is coming out of this episode just traumatized. Probably for the rest of her life.
Yeah, probably. And, bravo to Torchwood. If the like dark and depressing is what they were going for like depicting this totally dysfunctional family in which Lynn seems to either be oblivious or willingly oblivious to the fact that like Roy is definitely verbally abusing their daughter and probably has a history
physically,
of,
I mean, he slaps her.
Yeah, and physically. Yeah. Physically as well. Yep. Not getting this stuff on Doctor Who.
Well, that's not true. Fear her.
Oh, yeah, true. But in this, it feels so much more sinister because it's just like, fear her, like that was the entire, like, point of the episode, or that was the entire thing the episode revolved around. Here, it's just like, yeah, it's just this dysfunction, like, here it is, people.
Yeah, I guess because in this episode it's presented as being very pedestrian. Like, yeah, this is just a thing that happens. Whereas in Fear Her, it was like, this is this horrible, monstrous thing, and we have to, like, fight against this. Where in this episode, it's just like, yeah, it's just like there are people like this, and, if you're going to do something about it, like, what are you going to do?
Right.
And I just realized that the way I delivered that line comes off as very, like, uncaring, but that wasn't my point. My point is, like, the episode is asking, like, what are you going to do about it? Because it's, like, so normal. Quote, normal, unquote.
Yeah. But anyway, Jasmine goes off into the woods again, and Gwen and Owen... No, not Gwen and Owen. Jack and Gwen.
Gwen and Jack.
Jack and Gwen go out and follow her. She is like, hey, I'm going to go live with the fairies now. And Jack is like, you're not sure about that decision. You can't be sure. And she's like, oh, I'm sure.
The fairies are like, if you don't let her come with us, we will kill like dozens, if not hundreds of more people. And Jack's like, wow, when you put it that way.
Yeah. That's an even bigger, like, hit at the end of this episode, too, which is that there's nothing they can do. So they have to let Jasmine go. And they do that. And as soon as it happens, Lynn runs up to Jack. And bravo for her whoever plays Lynn.
Adrienne O'Sullivan.
Right, Adrienne O'Sullivan did an excellent job depicting a mother who had just lost her, husband, I guess, and now daughter.
Yep. Mm-hmm. She's wailing into Jack's arms, and all he can do is apologize. Gwen's upset at Jack too, but yeah, I mean, this really is the Jack episode. He's really faced with no good choices to make here.
Right. And he justifies it at the end. And again, we're seeing that Jack is like kind of divergent from the Doctor, even though we compared, I guess maybe we were just the ones who kind of thrust this on him, but like, the Doctor would always be like, I'm going to save everyone. I'm going to find a way to save everyone and have this, and like, enforce a good resolution. Mm-hmm. Whereas Jack is just like, well, nothing I can do. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're making it sound like he doesn't care, but there really was like nothing that he could do in this episode.
Yeah, no, and that's like not what I mean, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like he's forced, and the Doctor, in a way, this is down to like the episode itself, because the Doctor is obviously not usually forced into a situation like this. But it's like, he doesn't really have any... It's like, either let, what's her name, Jasmine go, which she wants to, or let hundreds more die.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the Doctor would always break the confines of the story to come up with the best possible resolution, but the Doctor can do that because the Doctor has all this technology and is an alien and like has the TARDIS and has lived for hundreds of more years than Jack. Like, the Doctor has the ability to break these confines, whereas Jack is, I mean, at this point he's immortal, but he still really is just a human with a human level understanding of these things. And he even admits, like, throughout the episode, like, we don't know anything about these fairies. We can't track them. We don't know what they want. We don't know how they kill people. They exist outside of time. Like, we are well outside of our depth here.
Yeah, now that I think about it, the fairies are just another, like, Doctor Who being that can just do whatever they want, whenever they want, pretty much.
Yeah, especially
kind
so
like
since it's revealed that they really are outside of time, because Gwen looks at one of the Cottingley photographs at the end of this episode, and it's revealed that one of the fairies is Jasmine. Like, one of the fairies in the photograph is Jasmine.
Right, and that's how the episode ends.
Yeah. Jeez. On the topic of Jack being like the Doctor, I did want to like throw a quick thing that I noticed out here was the like, not the overt similarities, but there is like a similarity between Jack and the Doctor's outfit at this time, the 10th Doctor, who had the very long coat. And I noticed in this episode that Jack's like military coat is just as long as that 10th Doctor coat. So I just thought that was an interesting kind of parallel, I guess is the word.
Yeah. Yeah, just hammering it home even more, I guess. And yeah, you're right. I mean, if Jack looks like any of the Doctors, it's the 10th.
Mm-hmm. And
they're not that similar, but like, yeah, if he looks like any of them, it's the 10th.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on something here at the end. We get a little line, and I think it was actually interspersed throughout the episode too, but it's a line from a poem by Yeats.
Mm-hmm.
For the world's more full of weeping than you can understand, or something like that.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
It's here on the Wikipedia page. Apparently, Fairy Voice says the whole stanza, but... Yeah.
Well, I just find that interesting because that poem by Yeats is like a good example of a fantasy poem that uses the fantasy, like, not cliche, I guess, but like fantasy thing that a lot of fantasy poems and stories do, of like depicting a strong threshold between, everyday life and sort of a fantasy world that exists on the cusp of that. And
Mm-hmm.
the poem is called The Stolen Child. It's basically about a child who, like, because the world is so bad, has to retreat to some other, world or some fantasy world. And like a lot of the poems from this era, there's a sinisterness to that fantasy world.
Right.
But yeah, this episode I think does a good job depicting that threshold as well. You see that like a lot of the times right before the fairies appear, there's someone crosses some sort of barrier or something like, and for example, the fence, like when Roy puts up that fence, like that's pretty much his undoing because once he crosses that fence, he's fully in the fairies world. Or even like at the beginning, like the framing of the shot when Jasmine and Goodson cross under that tunnel, like it's as if they're like now in sort of the fairies realm or whatever. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple other examples too. I'm forgetting what they were, but like right before the fairies appear, there's usually some sort of, I don't know, border that people cross. So kind of playing back into that
Yeah, like Estelle
1800s.
has to leave her house. She
Yeah,
has to go through the doorway to exit her
that's
house,
another one too.
and kind of in doing so enters the fantasy world.
Yeah. So that's a big fantasy. I don't want to say it's a trope, but like it's a big fantasy thing. Like, think of Narnia and stuff like that. And it was more prevalent in the 1800s, I think. But yeah, this
Mm-hmm.
episode uses it to good effect, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I didn't notice that, actually. I wanted to talk about briefly how this episode kind of sends up is not necessarily the right word, but kind of plays on the like chosen one trope. That is a trope, the trope of like someone being the chosen one who's going to save the world.
Yeah, and it's a fantasy trope, nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a trope that appears a lot in fantasy. And in this episode, I don't think it's a coincidence that Jasmine is referred to as a chosen one, but in this episode, like what the episode's kind of playing with is that the chosen one isn't going to save the world or anything, is going to save the world, actually, but not by like being this great hero, by just joining these terrible, villainous creatures in their fun time and basically keeping them at bay that way. So I thought that was very interesting how in this story, the chosen one isn't this paragon or this ultimate force for good who saves the day because they have some mystical, magical chosen one abilities. No, she's like a girl who has to join the enemy in order to save the day.
Right, and it also wants to.
Right.
That is kind of a PJ Hammond twist, like with Sapphire and Steel Assignment 2, they had to sacrifice Tully.
Yeah, that's like the resolution of this, not just the train, but the resolution of this. Like a lot of this reminded me of like a better version of Assignment 2. Because yeah, like you said, they have to Steel, sorry, does sacrifice Tully at the end of that story, and Sapphire kind of plays the part of Gwen in this analog, because Sapphire's like, really, there's like nothing else we could do, like that's the only resolution to this, and Steel goes, there's nothing else we can do, like the ghosts are going to keep on killing unless we give them Tully, which is very analogous to this, where Jack is like, we have to give them Jasmine or the fairies are going to keep killing everyone in the world.
Right. And there's always a sinisterness to PJ Hammond's endings too. Like even just think of Assignment 4, like they save the day, but then they're like, yeah, we're gonna have to remember to reseal this guy or this force again in like 75 years. And
that ending became retroactively even more sinister when Sapphire and Steel get locked away in the diner and aren't going to be able to seal him up again.
yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that. But you're right. They basically, yeah, wow.
But yeah, that's even present in this story too, because Jack mentions that they don't only just take one chosen one, they like every century or couple dozen years or however long, like pick another chosen one who will join the fairies. And so like basically the implication is that these events are going to be repeated again at some point in the future, and maybe Torchwood or Jack or Unit or the Doctor won't be there to stop at that time, and who knows what'll happen.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I want to touch on here is like if you're watching this without having watched Doctor Who, I feel this episode heavily telegraphs that there's going to be some more to like a connection between Jack's immortality and the fairies and the chosen ones. But that's like not the case. Because I don't know, like to bring up Jack's immortality so heavily in an episode that deals with these fairies that choose a child and make them immortal, like that seems to indicate that there's going to be some connection between those two things. But
it's definitely a red herring of sorts.
Yeah, but as we know, or as anyone would know from watching Doctor Who, it's not that at all.
No, it's because Rose looked into the time vortex and became a god and then like revived Jack when he got killed by these street sweeper Daleks that were just roaming around an alien space station designed to broadcast reality television to the entirety of the world, because that's so much easier to explain than fairies did it.
Wow.
Sometimes I forget how convoluted the plot to like Bad Wolf was. And then I remember. That somehow Russell T really pulled it off.
Yeah, that he did. Just like PJ Hammond pulled this one off. I think this is probably my favorite Torchwood episode so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I was trying to... It was probably between this and maybe I think Ghost Machine I really enjoyed. Just because I liked the themes between the past... the past and the future and all of that. But I think I put this above Ghost Machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all I have to really touch on for this one.
Yeah, so I guess we can go into our segments for the week.
Yeah, like our how many of the 7 sins does Gwen commit in this episode segment?
Surprisingly, I had her doing none.
I had her as displaying pride and wrath because we actually skipped the scene where Gwen and Reese arrive back to their apartment and see that it's been totally trashed. Gwen knows that this has been done by the fairies, and when she confronts Jack about it, she goes like, you know what, Jack? I'm a police officer. I've never felt scared in my own home, and now I do. And that seemed a little prideful to me, you know?
Yeah, you're right, actually. I didn't even think about that, but you're right.
And then she gets angry, which is 100% understandable.
Right.
But is also a display of wrath.
Yeah, wow. You're 100% right, actually. Did not even think about that.
Well, I'm keeping on top of this 7 sins count. We don't want... this is an ensemble show, but Gwen is definitely... If there is a protagonist, it's definitely her. And, we don't want anyone starring in these shows who is a sin committer,
Like that old meme, there'll be no swearing on my Christian Minecraft server.
Yeah, Torchwood is definitely a Christian show. And
those websites that I know we've talked about them on the show that like look at movies through like a Christian or religious or faith perspective and talk about like all of the non-godly things that happen in those. I wonder if there's like one of those websites that's looked at Torchwood.
I'm sure there is. I'll see if I can do some digging if I remember and see if I can find one.
I wonder if there's one of those. You could always use the parents' guide on IMDb.
Yeah, if you want to navigate IMDb's like 2003 style layout, then sure. Unfortunately,
IMDb remains like the foremost source for television and movie data, even though that people have tried to make competitors like the movie database and the open movie database. Like neither of them have really caught on and achieved the kind of data consolidation that IMDb has. And for that reason, I don't think we'll ever stop using IMDb unless they decide to just like shut it down one day for some reason.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, how is this going to affect Jack? Well, I think Jack's walking away from this one also pretty badly. His psyche is pretty damaged again.
I think so too. I don't think he's going to display it, both because of his character and because of the episodic nature of the show. But
right,
yeah, having this all happen again is probably pretty, and being even more like within the eye of the storm this time, and having to give up Jasmine is going to be pretty hard hitting.
And not only that, but being just so powerless to do anything about it in this story. I mean, he was powerless before, but in this story, like, he is an active participant because he's the one who has to make the decision to give Jasmine to the fairies. Whereas before, you know, he witnessed his buddies dying, but he didn't have to like decide like, oh yeah, they're gonna die for the greater cause or whatever. Right.
Also having his former lover die and him not being able to stop it, because we actually glossed over this fact pretty heavily, but we indicated it, but like Gwen and Estelle didn't know Gwen. God, what am I even saying? Let me start over. Estelle didn't know Jack's father. She knew Jack, and they were lovers. Right. And he hasn't revealed that fact to her. We kind of touched on that, but not as explicitly as what I just said.
And then she dies, and he's really affected by this.
Yeah.
He's like weeping while holding her dead body, which is like more emotion that we've seen Jack display in most of these episodes.
And on Doctor Who as well. I don't think he's ever really had that display of emotion on Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, overall pretty heavily affected, I think.
Yep.
Can't wait to go back to
Jack's coming in
next week where it's like stuff almost equally as bad happens and he's just like, yeah, whatever.
Hey Jack, remember when your like lover died? What?
Wow. I only laughed at that because I was going to make a dumb joke about like time resetting every week like it kind of appears to do in The Prisoner, but then I didn't make that joke and it just came out as if I was laughing at Jack like losing the people he cares about.
Yeah, it did kind of come off that way a little bit. But then you explained it, so it's okay. Anyway, Britain's 10 actors. I'm amazed we still call this segment Britain's 10 actors when we've discovered Britain has hundreds of actors.
But it's funnier to just live in denial and pretend it's still the same 10 people in every show.
Fair enough.
I didn't look up anyone this week for this.
Well, the first person I have is Eve Pierce, which is like a weird combination of Eve Miles and Jacqueline Pierce, who plays Estelle. She was in The Bill, Zedcars, Coronation Street, which apparently I misspelled as Connotation Street, which sounds way more interesting.
Damn you, autocorrect.
And then, like, she's actually had quite a big acting career, but pretty much all of it's in stuff I didn't recognize, except a couple instances of ITV Playhouse and Play of the Week.
Mm-hmm.
We have Laura Philpott as Jasmine. She's been in Casualty was the only thing I recognized on the IMDb page, but Wikipedia asserts that she was also in The Idiot's Lantern.
Huh.
With no source.
Huh.
So.
Wow.
Maybe she was an uncredited cast member in The Idiot's Lantern. Maybe Wikipedia's just lying.
Maybe it's both. No, I don't know.
Adrian O'Sullivan, who plays Lynn, was in The Bill, and then like a movie called Submarine.
Uh-huh.
And William Travis, who plays Roy, was in Doctors, Coronation Street, Casualty, Downton Abbey, The Mill, The Bill, and then a series of movies called This is England 86, This is England 88, and This is England 90.
Huh. Triple play.
Which are the years, not the, like, release numbers. I guess I should clarify.
Add that to the triple play watch list.
Great.
Check out Triple Play Movie Trilogy Podcast, where we watch movie trilogies and talk about them.
Please. Triple Play needs more listeners. Please.
We're begging you here.
And that's all I've got.
All right.
For this week.
Heck yeah. Well, that's all I got in general. In general, because that's what we're about to record for The Prisoner.
Wow. Wow. Well, you can email us at thedoctor@decadavegetable.com. Questions, comments, concerns, angry rants, love letters, your thoughts on Jack's emotional damage. I don't know. You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify, all at Trust Your Doctor. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook, Trust Your Doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. Next time we're going to be watching Countryside, but until then, the end.